Hello again, gamers. Welcome back for another top 10 list. I'm the board game captain, and today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 favorite mechs from the 3039 record sheets unabridged. So these are any mechs available in that particular record sheet file, that compilation of mechs. Basically, in reality, basically any of the mechs available to you throughout the entirety of the Succession Wars plus the War of 3039, with few exceptions. There are a few retconned mechs in later sheets that I'm not including in this because they were not in this product. They later retconned them into being, of course, Star League era mechs or Succession War era mechs, but had not put them out specifically in this particular product. So now this is, of course, a very arbitrary list. I'm just picking right now what feels to me like my 10 favorite mechs from this list. And my list has and will continue to change over time. So feel free to comment on my list down below. Also feel free to tell me what are your favorite mechs that I missed in the list down below. But without any further ado, let's get to my number 10. Number 10. My number 10 favorite mech from the record sheets 3039 is the Mongoose Mon67. Now, the Mongoose is a very fast mech for the Succession War time period. It's light, it's fast, and it's well armed with 3 medium lasers. It's also got a small laser, but you know that's just a pittance in regard to the rest of it. But it's fairly speedy. Nature, along with its fairly decent amount of firepower for a very light mech, makes this a really, really good mech to run around the sides and rear and then come in at short range in the rear and unload with those medium lasers and harass and disrupt enemy lines. In the Succession War time period, where there's not a lot of very accurate long-range weapons, this is actually one of the better light mechs in the entirety of the Succession War time period, and it's why the Mongoose Mon67 made it to be my number 10 on my list of my top 10 favorite mechs from the 3039 record sheets. Number 9. My number 9 is a mech that only newly made it to my list because I have fairly recently discovered how awesome it is, and it is one I'm waiting for the plastic model to come out in the new Kickstarter that just happened, the Mercenaries Kickstarter, so that I will be able to paint it up and use it. And this is my favorite version of a terrible mech. It is the Charger. So this is the Charger CGR1A5. Now, the basic version of the Charger is awful and meme-worthy, and it is, but this is when they actually start to try to get serious with the Charger. They're like, we'll slow it down, give it a smaller engine, but still keep it pretty fast for a big beast of a mech. It's got 4.6 movement. It's also got the Autocannon 20, which in the Succession War time period is one of the best armor-piercing weapons, especially since you've lost the technology to reproduce Gauss rifles during the Succession War time period. So you generally have to get in pretty close with the Autocannon 20, but there's not a lot of good long-range armor-piercing weapons to stop you from doing so. And then in addition, it has 2 SRM6s, so you can have this 1-2 punch of Autocannon 20 and then a bunch of SRM6 shots to find the hole that the Autocannon 20 makes, or Autocannon 20 and maybe some Inferno rounds to overheat your enemy, which also makes for a wonderful 1-2 punch of overheating them to slow them down and possibly shut them down, which during the Succession War time period is a very viable topic with only single heat sinks during the vast majority of the Succession War time period. There's a lot of mechs with severe heat issues, even if they fire all of their own weapons and nothing else can severely overheat. So dishing out a whole lot of extra heat with those 2 SRM6s could be really deadly. And then once you've shut them down and punched a hole in them, also firing some regular ammo from the SRM6s to find the holes could be great for crit seeking. So the Charger CGR1A5 is my number 9 favorite mech from the 3039 record sheets. Number 8. Now, my number 8 favorite mech from the 3039 record sheets is a mech that used to be much higher on my list. It's dropped down a bit because while I still love it, especially in theory. The practice of it is that it rarely actually lives up to the fear factor that it creates when it walks onto the battlefield. But it's still a great mech. I love the fear in my opponent's eyes when I field it. It has to kind of get lucky to get all its shots off and make sure it actually, does the damage that you would want it to do. But that is the King Crab KGC 0000. Now this is a mech with 2 autocannon 20s. And generally speaking, in the Succession War time period, if you're just playing with mechs from the 3039 record sheets Unabridged, it is the only mech with 2 autocannon 20s. Now, there were some more retconned in later, but again, if you're just playing with mechs from this sheet, it's the only one that has that fear factor of possibly being able to hit an enemy mech in a single location for 40 damage. Now, does that actually happen that often? No, but it can happen. It has happened. And when it does, 40 damage in one location is just insane. And with the exception of the center torso of the most heavily armored mechs in the game, you're probably tearing through and ripping a mech in half with those 2 shots if you hit in the same place. And even if you hit in 2 different places, you're probably tearing through into internal structure for most mechs, except again for some of the heaviest mechs in the game, which can have 30 plus armor on a location. But the King Crab also is just a wonderful fear-inducing mech when your opponent sees it walk onto the battlefield. Most opponents, even knowing that they have to get lucky to get both of those autocannon 20 shots to hit their target, unless you're playing with a really improved gunnery skill, it usually causes a mass amount of fear, disproportionate to how actually capable the mech is, and causes your opponent to panic and make mistakes, which in itself is a reason to take the King Crab KGC 0000, and that is why it is my number 8 favorite mech from the 3039 record sheets. Number 7. Now, my number 7 mech is going to probably be a surprise to some people. This is the Rifleman RFL3C. This is a mech that I love to play turret tech with, specifically because it comes with 2 autocannon 10s. So this becomes a really great chassis to load armor-piercing rounds onto, because if you can stick this mech in a heavy forest so it doesn't have to move anymore, doesn't have to get those extra difficulties for moving, it's at a fairly, maybe at medium range, sitting there in that heavy forest, not moving anymore, it can deal with the fact that those armor-piercing rounds make it harder to hit the target with, especially if you've improved its gunnery skill. And then possibly cause crits on huge heavy assault mechs, things like Highlanders and Atlases, before you even pierce the armor. The armor-piercing rounds are very deadly at long range against big, heavy beast mechs like the Atlas, because of the fact that you could possibly crit them on their gyro, possibly crit them on their engine before even piercing the armor, and severely inhibit them from being able to do anything. And also maybe possibly crit them on their autocannon 20 before they even get into a decent range with it. And all with a couple of lowly autocannon 10s, things that many people tend to underestimate. Autocannon 10s, in my opinion, are the best place to use armor-piercing rounds. Autocannon 20s, you already have a really decent chance of piercing the armor, so armor-piercing rounds and the reduction in the number of rounds you get in each ton of ammo with them really don't feel like a good fit for autocannon 20s, and autocannon 5s and autocannon 2s get too much of a reduction in the ability to possibly roll a crit chance, whereas the autocannon 20, the autocannon 10 is kind of this perfect middle ground where you're not reduced too much in your chance to hit, where you could still get a critical, and you're also not so much damage that you're not going to just pierce the armor already. So the pair of autocannon 10s on the Rifleman RFL3C are a place where I really like to use armor-piercing rounds. And that is why it is my number 7 favorite mech from the 3039 record sheets. Number 6. My number 6 favorite mech from the 3039 record sheets is my favorite little disposable, expendable light mech that can cause crazy heat spikes. I already talked in this list a bit about how heat spikes are a very viable option in the Succession Wars, especially because you're generally not dealing with double heat sinks in the Succession Wars, and there's a lot of mechs that have crazy heat problems. Any of the laser boat mechs during the Succession Wars generally have issues with heat management. So being able to throw them off and maybe either causing them to just, not fire or not fire very many weapons at all for a turn, or even causing them to shut down can be unbelievably valuable. So this is the Javelin JVN10N, as in November. And the thing is, this mech can jump 6 hexes and has 2 SRM6s. Now, if you fire both those SRM6s with Inferno rounds and manage to connect with both of them, which if you're jumping is going to need some luck or need some improved gunnery skill, but if you do manage to do that, you could very easily, on average, get that maximum of 15 extra heat added onto a mech. Now, if you're firing on something like a Black Knight or a Guillotine, who's already probably starting to get a little bit of heat if you're close enough to be able to fire 2 SRM6s on them, so they're sitting there with 3 heat on the heat scale, they fire a bunch of stuff that maintains that 3 heat, and then you give them another 15 heat, that's insane. So yeah, there's a reason why I really like this version of the Javelin. Now granted, lots of versions of the Javelin are great. This is just an overall great mech. But I love specifically for playing the old heat game with the JVN10N. And that is why it is my number 6 favorite mech from the 3039 record sheets. Number 5. Now, my number 5 favorite mech from the 3039 record sheets is my favorite direct fire support, heavy fire support sort of mech. It is the awesome AWS HQ. Now, this is just the basic version of the awesome. It is the standard one, but we're talking about an 80-ton mech that slowly walks on with a ludicrous amount of armor, even a really good amount of armor in the rear, with 3 PPCs. It's also got a small laser, but again, that's just an extra weapon. Now, there are some issues with this mech. It is ludicrously slow. It's only got 35 movement. In addition, of course, the PPCs do have a minimum range, so something light and fast that can get within the minimum range is going to mess with it. But again, lots of armor to deal with that. But while at a decent range, maybe parked in a forest, maybe parked behind a hill, firing 3 PPCs at the enemy will really peel off armor in the Succession War time period. 10 damage each on those 3 PPCs is just, it's a steady amount of large portions of armor just being stripped off every turn on your enemy's slow big mechs. I usually use an awesome to fire at enemy heavy or even assault mechs. Some of the assault mechs can outclass it with varieties of weapons, but on the heavy mechs, especially ones that try to focus in on having a lot of firepower to the detriment of their armor a little bit, like say Warhammers or Marauders, the awesome can be unbelievably deadly as it uses that 10 damage from each shot to just tear into internal structure and start causing crit checks. And this is definitely, like I said, my favorite long-range direct fire support mech of the 3039 record sheets, and that is why it has made it all the way down to my number 5 on my list. Number 4. My number 4 on my list is my favorite medium mech of the 3039 record sheets. It's actually the only medium mech that made my list. There's far more light, heavy, and assault mechs on my list than there are medium mechs, but mainly because I do find that a lot of the medium mechs in this time period are a little underwhelming. You have a lot of things like the Succession War era versions of the Shadowhawk or the Griffin, where, some versions might be okay, but they're not great. But this version hits way above its weight class, and it's another mech that disproportionately strikes fear into the heart of your enemy when they see it come onto the field, and it is the Hunchback, and this is just the basic version, the HBK 4G. Now the thing is, there are lots of very good versions of the Hunchback in the Succession War time periods, versions with lots of lasers, versions with SRM6s, but the HBK 4G with that autocannon 20 and 2 medium lasers to then crit seek for where you've punched the hole with the autocannon 20 is a wonderful flank protector. You run this thing up the side, you have it go in against an enemy medium mech or even an enemy heavy mech, and they're going to be afraid and pulling back because they don't want to get hit by that autocannon 20. And then you back it up with something long range with LRMs or PPCs to also try to find the big hole that's been made by the autocannon 20, and you're going to tear apart that medium or heavy mech on the flank. You do want to keep it on the flank though, because if your enemy's able to concentrate fire on it, really just a couple turns of shooting with most of your enemy's lance firing at the Hunchback will tear it apart. But if you can keep it on the flank, so it's really only having to take fire from one, maybe two mechs, it won't be too bad. It's not badly armed for a 50-ton mech, but it is incredibly well armed for a 50-ton mech. And that is why it made it all the way down to my number 4 on this list. Number 3. Now, my number 3 favorite mech on this list is one of I think the only mech on this list that's using double heat sinks. Now, it is a mech that can show up in the Succession War time period. I generally prefer to use mechs that don't use double heat sinks in the Succession War time period, but if you're playing first Succession War or you're playing after the discovery of the Helm Memory Core, of course, there are double heatsink mechs that come back into use at that time period or had not yet fallen out of use in the early time period, and you could be playing with double heatsink mechs. And this one is just too good not to make my list because it is my favorite missile boat mech of the entire Succession War time period. It is the Catapult CPLT C1B, as in Bravo. Now, this is the royal variant of the Catapult. It is basically armed as the standard version of the Catapult is, with the 2 LRM-15s and the medium lasers, but you got double heat sinks, which means unlike most of the other Succession War versions of the Catapult, this one does not have a severe heat problem. It's also an incredibly good multi-role mech. At long range, you can pepper enemies with those 2 LRM-15s, looking for the holes punched by that Hunchback of yours that's gone around the flank. It's a really good mech to back him up. And if something runs past him and tries to get close to you, if it runs in within a few hexes of you, you have the opportunity to surprise them by jumping in behind them and firing off those 4 medium lasers. Which suddenly getting hit in the rear with 4 medium lasers on something that's fast enough to run in close to you, so in this time period it's gonna be a light or medium mech at best, getting hit in the rear with those 4 medium lasers can suddenly scare the heck out of that mech warrior, realizing that, oh yeah, the Catapult is not just a one-trick pony, it's got some multi-role use. In addition, when you run out of LRM-15 ammo, you can run in close and start doing that and jumping around and disrupting your enemy's lines, and doing that with a 65-ton mech is kind of crazy. It's why I love it. I think the Catapult CPLT C1B is fantastic. It's why I made it all the way down to my number 3 favorite mech of the 3039 record sheets. Number 2. My number 2 favorite mech of the 3039 record sheets is a mainstay. It is an icon. It is definitely one of the mechs that most people think of when they think of Battletech. There's a couple mechs that come to mind, and it is the Atlas. It is the AS-7D, the standard version of the Atlas. This is a 100-ton beast of a mech. And in a time period where there aren't a lot of, head-capping weapons at range, this mech can walk up slowly, unloading fire at every range. You've got an LRM-20 for long range. You've got the autocannon 20 and the SRMs for short range. You've got weapons for every range bracket. You also have one of the best armored mechs of this time period. The Atlas is another mech that just causes your opponent to tremble in fear when they see them come onto the battlefield. And in my experience, it is a mech that, even though it isn't as focused in its role as the King Crab, it is a mech that actually outperforms the King Crab, generally speaking, because of its ability to exchange fire at every range bracket and do it incredibly well. And generally speaking, outclass most mechs in this time period. In fact, that is why it is my number 2, all the way down on my number 2 on this list. And now it is time for number 1. So my number 1 might be a surprise for anyone who doesn't know me very well, but my number 1 is actually a light mech, and it is my favorite light mech in the entirety of the Succession War time period. It's also my favorite mech from the 3039 record sheets unabridged. This is the Wolfhound WLF1A. So now, the Wolfhound, the regular Wolfhound, because this is not the basic version, the regular Wolfhound, you know, it's got the 6'9" movement, it's fairly fast, it's got better armor than a lot of other mechs for its size at only 35 tons. It doesn't have jump capability, but it's got a decent amount of firepower. You got the large laser, you got the 3 medium lasers, and you got a rear-facing medium laser. So what do you get to change when you change to the 1A? So the 1A removes that one rear-facing medium laser that was really superfluous on the basic version, and adds a heatsink. And again, this is a laser boat mech, and like I said before earlier on this list, laser boat mechs in this time period have a lot of heat sinking issues. So that extra heatsink is a huge plus for this mech. There's another variant where instead of removing the rear laser and getting another heatsink, they just swing that rear laser around to the front, but that causes more of the same issue where you really can't fire everything without significantly overheating. So in this case, you can actually fire everything without significantly overheating. You still probably need to next turn pull away and maybe only fire some things, really reduce what you fire to cool off before you come back in and try to fire everything again. But this is an amazing mech to run around the flank at range, harassing with that large laser, firing it off at your enemy's flanking mech before getting around the rear and coming in at point blank range and unloading with everything before running away and darting into a forest or behind a hill again, and repeating the process to disrupt your enemy's lines. 3 medium lasers and a large laser are nothing to sneeze at. And yeah, that is why the Wolfhound is my #1 favorite mech from the entirety of the 3039 record sheets unabridged. So let me know, what mechs did I miss? What mechs are your favorite mechs from the 3039 record sheets unabridged? Comment down below. Tell me which are your favorites and why. Tell me why they're your favorites. And let me know, you know, what have I been doing to play these mechs wrong? Let me know. I'd love to hear it because I'd love to give them a try in my next game of Battletech. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.